Hey everybody, Zachary Jeans. Let's keep walking through this Bible. So today is day 152, and we are in the book of Acts. We're looking at Paul and yet another trial, another defense of his faith, defense of our faith. And he's going to find his way on to Rome one way or another, right? Jesus told him. He told him. And so there's the hand of the Lord directing his path, and then there's the working it out in reality. So, a little sip of coffee here. Oh, yeah, good stuff. All right, before we get going, let's pray. Lord, I love you. God, thanks. You are with me. God, you are with us. Lord, you give us the ability to handle situations that are otherwise out of our fleshly control, Lord. Give us words to say in the moment. And even despite ourselves, God, despite myself, God. You are so good. God, you're so good. God, we lift up all those, God, who gotten on our nerves or been difficult to deal with. Lord, even absolute enemies, if there are some of those in our lives. And God Almighty, you know who they are. You know who's coming up in the hearts of those who are praying right now. I lift up to you those people, Lord, and I just pray that you pour out cool water for them, grace, mercy. God, pour out your mercy. Bring life where there was death. Bring healing where there was hurt. God, please speak truth where there were lies. And God, please mend broken lives and hearts. God, I don't want that to be cliche. I want that to be true, Lord. Lord, we just ask those things, and we ask that you bless, God, just your word right now. Help us see what you want to see. Help me teach what you want me to teach. We ask that in your name, Jesus. Amen. Yeah, man. While we are yet enemies with God, Christ Jesus died for us, right? Basically, that's the gospel. So, okay, we are in the book of Acts, chapter 25. So we're just gonna take chapter 25, verse 1 through the end. I think that's verse 27. And here we go. Now 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul. And they urged him, asking a favor against Paul, that he summon him to Jerusalem, because they were planning to ambush and kill him on the way. And now remember, Festus is not the first guy, Felix. Felix was the first Roman governing person that Paul was sent to by the tribune Lysias. And you remember the plot that 42 men had made that commitment not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. But it was thwarted because Paul's sister's son, Paul's nephew, overheard this plot and brought it to the attention of Paul. And Paul, the centurion, guarded the centurion to the proconsul, who was Lysias. And basically, they thwarted that plot. It was amazing. It's an amazing story how it works out. And it's a pattern that replays itself throughout history, this sort of pattern. But anyway, so Paul goes to Caesarea, and that's where Felix is. And Felix, hears him and hears him and hears him, and maybe looking for a bribe. And but eventually he leaves his post. He steps down from his post. It's time. And the new person's name is Festus. Okay, so Festus goes up to Jerusalem, meets with the leadership, and lo and behold, they want him to come back so that, yet again, they can ambush him. And so everybody wonders, did those 42 dudes break their vow? Did they die? They just go waste away out in the desert? I don't know. Who knows? It'd be fascinating to find out what the story was there, right? I wonder if some saw Paul's deliverance and at first were mad and whatever, but then they kept bumping into people who believed in Jesus this way and went, maybe it's true. Like, that was airtight. He was supposed to die. Maybe it's true. Maybe Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I don't know. But here we have Festus listening, right? So after he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. And the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. So sometimes the news is we prosecute people before we get the court case, right? And sometimes the court case delivers us evidence, and those judging don't rule according to the evidence. So just because something doesn't receive a judgment doesn't mean that there wasn't enough evidence. It might mean that, like Felix, just like, nope, still guilty. Stick around. You need to stick around here. Hang out. Forever being held in prison for charges. It's nuts. But that's Paul's life, and he's defending himself now, yet again in court, under this new governor, against what appears to be a bunch of new charges. And essentially, they're all being thwarted. They're all not being able to prove themselves true in court. Okay? So, Paul argued in defense. Neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and there be tried on these charges before me? But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal and ought to be tried where I ought to be tried. To the Jews, I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Paul appeals to Caesar. And as a Roman citizen, this is how this right went. Now, I find it interesting. Had Festus heard the testimony and rendered judgment, instead of submitting to the decorum of those in power locally and the political pressure in his new role, wanted to make friends with the people that he was governing, right? He could have rendered judgment and said, Paul's innocent, or maybe he's not innocent, but he's not guilty of death, right? But it was clear that Festus wasn't going to do that. Felix hadn't done it. Festus didn't do it. And so Paul, not wanting to spend probably sit there and go through this whole process over and over again, and eventually be moved to Jerusalem. He wanted to honor Jesus. Remember when he stood by Paul and told him, the Jews will deliver you over to the Romans, and, you're going to go preach, testify before me in Rome. So Paul, with conviction, says, I appeal my case basically to Caesar. And he's willing to die for his charges, whether he's found innocent or not. His hands are in God, or his life is in God's hands. And man, that's a hard thing. It's easy to say, right? It's easy to say. Take up your cross and follow you, Lord. I'll do it. Narrow path, wide way to destruction, narrow gate that leads to life. I'm on it. Peter struggled with that. Remember? And it's not easy. Mark, it's thought in that gospel, there's that guy who was there at the garden, and he was like lurking around, seeing everything go down. And then in the commotion, his robe or cloak was stripped from him, and he ran naked home. It's thought that was Mark, John Mark. And, he fled. Everybody, it's like we get put in these positions where we could stand for the Lord, and then it's really hard. But here we have Paul. Remember Paul, who didn't shrink back from declaring the whole counsel of God to anyone that he met in Asia, right? He had a clear conscience in saying that. It's pretty nuts. And here he is, years he's stuck here and being held over for judgment, for trial. And that's not an easy place. I went through that process. I was in the military and I went in the U.S. Army. This was just after the first Desert Storm, and we were in the drawdown phase. So technically the fighting and all that was over, but we were over there. I went through basic training, and I got stuck. I was going in to be a Patriot missile crew member, and it was very, very interesting. So the guys that were my drill sergeants had just come back, most of them from that conflict, and they were not nice people. And not just nice people in the sense of, well, all drill sergeants are jerks, right? They're bad dudes. And they were disgusted at what they had experienced in some of their fellow soldiers, in their discipline and their unwillingness to engage when they were ordered to engage. And so they come back and they've got this determination that they are going to make right this Nintendo generation, this video game generation. And a couple of them, being Army Rangers, decided that they were going to break a ton of military codes and treat just regular soldiers going through their basic training and apply some of the principles and things from Ranger training and a number of other schools. So sleep deprivation, psychological warfare on their own soldiers, all kinds of things. And I don't have time to tell all the stories, but the reason why I say it was so bad, they had people beat up, and I had to stand against their orders to deliver a couple people. One person in particular I'm thinking of right now, all two more. And I didn't break easily, and that was a real bummer because they just kept piling it on and on and on. And well, anyway, so we got to the end of basic, and I was not a nice person back then. I didn't know Jesus. So by God's grace, I was held over. I was held back. So if you fail your PT test, your physical training test, you get held over so that you can do more push-ups and sit-ups and run and whatever till you pass your physical fitness test, so that you can move on to your AIT, Advanced Individual Training. They got different names for it in different services. You go on to your secondary school to study for the job which you signed up for. And holdover, I discovered, was both a blessing and a curse, because I'm with guys who failed their PT tests and more or less were just like, I don't want to be in this thing anymore. So they were basically just giving up and waiting to be kicked out. Then there were people that were waiting on security clearances. I was waiting on a top secret because my MOS was 16 Tango. I was going to go be a Patriot missile crew member. The ones that shot down the incoming missiles, right? And that training was down in Fort Bliss, Texas, down by El Paso. So I'm up in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I had made a lot of enemies because the drill sergeants put a lot of pressure on me to lead the unit. And then after they took away my little rank inside the unit, then they pulled me aside privately and said, well, Private Jeans, we're going to hold you personally accountable to lead this unit without your rank. And they would check in with me throughout my training and ask me to influence our platoon leader. And they made the guy who was the biggest struggle bus of our platoon in charge. He was also a big guy, which, when he barked, people moved. But they put all these people in charge, but then privately made me accountable to their actions and to influence them. And so there were, and roughly speaking, a lot of the guys kind of even knew that, but they hated me. They hated me, both when I had an official title and when I didn't, because again, I was put in this sort of ranger-esque, like, obviously not totally like ranger training, but like, you know, where they made you stay awake with like an hour sleep every night, 2 hours sleep, you know, extra duty, keeping the lights on when they weren't supposed to be on, you know, or, you know, working when you weren't supposed to work, extra trainings that weren't applicable to what we were doing, psychological warfare, pitting, like creating actual conflicts, not just the kind of conflict where they created using me to hold me accountable to lead the unit in directions, good directions ultimately, but directions that they would then use kind of counterbalancing the individuals leading our squads and our platoon, asking soldiers privately to rough up one soldier in our group who was just abiding by the rules. He was kind of an artsy kid. He did not sign up for this. He was going into a desktop job type MOS job, and oh my gosh, got stuck in a group that were mostly going to artillery, or some were going to infantry where we were. There's a few of us that were going to higher end MOSs, you know, as far as, you know, the technical training. But anyway, there was all kinds of things. It's the kind of thing where they would threaten you. You know, some guys went AWOL. They were so terrified because, you know, they were talking crazy, telling them to go AWOL. So literally, we had some guys go run across the field. They told them, yeah, there's a train, runs right over there, across that North 40 field. It was tough. It was really tough. In the middle of that, we actually came home for Christmas. It was nuts. So anyway, I just setting this table, right? This really bad unit. And then I get to the end of my training and I find out I'm held over because I'm waiting my top secret clearance. And I'm like, I don't even know what holdover is. I know I'm so blitz tired and stuff. Then they worked us for 2 weeks in between the next training period. There were about 6 or 8 of us. And they used us as just dogs, as laborers that worked. We worked like 20-hour days. And we slept in our bunks, but we basically worked 18 to 20-hour days. Physical labor, painting, grinding, sanding, moving, stripping, mowing, doing all this work, right? And you're like, okay, tough story, right? You know, boo-hoo, Zach. We got to the end of that 2 weeks, and then they're like, yeah, you're still holed over. We don't know when you're going to get your clearance, and we don't know why you guys are still waiting on your clearance. But welcome to your new barracks. They walked us over to an empty barracks on our Starship, this big multi-unit building with like mess hall in the middle and all that. And drill sergeant drops us off upstairs. It's kind of an empty training barracks. And he's like, report for duty every morning at like 6 a.m., 600 hours, and you know, stay out of our hair otherwise, because they were starting training. So we show up and it's cold, it's winter, Oklahoma, and they just had us stand out there every morning for like a week or two, for like hours. And the senior drill sergeant, who was crazy, would just stare at us through his office window. No drill sergeants come out to us. And just look at us like we were idiots. Of course, they were screwing with us. In fact, we didn't have any duty to do. So again, now imagine about 4 weeks of that stuff after a hellish training, which guys have gone AWOL, freaked out, and we've been doing this stuff where we worked hard for 2 weeks and then a couple weeks of just having nothing to do but stand around in our barracks, no accountability, and just waiting and waiting and waiting. And then we discovered that there are other holdovers during that time. Some of them have been there for like 6 months. No direction. Just being held over, being used to do labor around the facilities off and on, mostly just no direction in life. Some of us had the ability to go drink over at the little post bar. And over those weeks, I started to find out that it was breaking people. Guys that were so tough and kind of hated my guts during that time because I was a yeller and orderer and this or and that or they broke down. They realized all the psychological crap that our drill sergeants had put us through. Now that they were on the other side, we all kind of bonded. But I started watching these, men break. Their marriages fall apart. They made it all the way through basic, and then this promise of a new job, and they couldn't go. And then you start having beers with people as they're getting on the bus. They're being other than honorably, or in some cases dishonorably discharged because they tried to do harm to themselves. One guy bought us beer, and we're sitting there having goodbye beers, and he bought us beer on the money that he got from hawking his wedding ring. Not only was his marriage over, but he was going home with an other than honorable, because there was no end in sight. And he just said, I want out. I don't care. I need out. Some guys had been there weeks and weeks. Some guys, there were a couple guys. One guy drank Windex. Like straight Windex. One guy, sorry, this is a little descriptive, took the buffers for the floors, and a pad about this big, tied the cord around his neck, threw the buffer out the second story window. That was the place I lived. There's active training going on in all these units around us, and we are stuck in a place with no future. And during that time, I didn't have Jesus. I didn't have Jesus. I was so angry at God. If there was a God. I used to go out in these Oklahoma thunderstorms out into the field. I'd go drink over at the gunner's end, then I'd walk back across the field, and I just thought, Pete, there's occasionally the chaplain would check in with us. His hands were tied. He couldn't do anything. And coming back across the field to our building, big, giant, spider webby lightning storms, right? The kind where tornadoes are often somewhere in the distance, who knows? Lightning never stops, and I would just stop. And I'd look up into the sky, wherever that point is where you look up towards God, for you. And I'd just look up into that raging, raging thunderstorm, and I'd cuss God out. I've said things to God. I cussed God out, challenged him, told him what he could go do to himself. He was totally empty, didn't exist, and to come just imagine, right? And once I felt like I had said my piece, I'm like, what do you got? Nothing. Walk in, take a shower, fall in my bed, get up 5 hours later and go work at a post gym, or there's a really nice, who turned out to be a Christian guy, I didn't know it really at the time, put it together afterwards, who took guys in and just gave them something to do, because the drill sergeants would come and just raise hell on guys that were stuck in this holdover, just pick on them, take out their anger, frustrations of their career on these guys. Eventually all this it's a longer story I'm going to tell in these minutes. I want to explain to you what holdover is like for Paul. I experienced holdover. So months and months go on, watching guys hurt themselves, leave, give up, watch the vindictiveness, yell at God, didn't really believe in God. I was searching for truth, but I didn't think that there was any God, and definitely not a Jesus God, right? And, but I will tell you, one night, the last time I yelled at God that way, I was walking past and there's just spider web like lightning. Oklahoma, right? Southern Oklahoma. And I've done this a number of times. And I just told God, I was like, you know, this and that and whatever. F you and mother effer and come at me. I didn't think so. I didn't, you know, whatever, right? I was 19, 20, something like that. And so I was done and I'm walking back. I probably got another 30 yards to the building, just a grassy field, right? It's raining and all this. And all of a sudden I hear this still small voice, like almost audible. Zachary, look up. Whoa. Maybe it was an impression, not quite an audible voice. Like, just, Zachary, look up. I look up, like just straight up. And, you know, there's lightning here and there, you know, thunder everywhere. And then all of a sudden, boom, straight down, like straight down. I could almost see the orientation and origination of a lightning bolt way up in the sky come straight down, and everything slowed down. It just slowed down. And about 50 feet above me, boom, lightning, clap of thunder, like right at me, shoved me down to the ground. So I didn't go out and cuss God out anymore. I knew there was a God. I didn't believe in Jesus. I was not going to believe in Jesus. But I knew that there had to be. I, you know, toyed with the idea off and on through my search up to that point. 3 years. And there was something there. There's a God there somewhere. God of what? Wasn't sure. So I got stuck in holdover, and eventually God delivered me onto my AIT. Not that one I went to. Oh, by the way, had I got on that bus, it's like a 10.5-hour ride from where we were going to there. I was told by some guys who eventually became my friends, you know, who were held over too. They're like, Zach, Jeans, had you gotten on that bus? We were going to, the guys had made a pact. This is why I kind of identify with Paul. There's about 50 of us that were supposed to get on this bus to go to Fort Bliss. I did not know this, but we were supposed to get on this bus. And they said, Zach, they're Jeans. We're the first middle of nowhere rest stop where there weren't people around that we got out, that you went into the bathroom. There were about 10 guys that had, 10 guys? I don't remember the numbers. A bunch of them had made a pact to beat me to death and leave me for dead and get back on the bus and move on. So I identify with Paul a bit. I identify with Paul raging against a God. Not, he thought he was serving God, right? But raging against Jesus, right? Disregarding his people that I met during those times. And so I was ready to actually get out of my holdover status, and I was just going to go in and just say, hey, I don't care, just get me out. And I went back over from this gym I was working at, and think of a cheap high school gym in a place that used to work on trucks, you know, military vehicles. And I walked over there, and no one was there because they were all out at the range. I couldn't even turn myself into the chaplain. He was on vacation. So I went to lunch, and while I'm at lunch at the mess hall, somebody comes in and like, Jeans, your FBI guy is here to interview you for my clearance. I'm like, oh, great. So I ran upstairs, and I was allowed to wear civilian clothes. And I had already finished my duty for the day. So I threw on my hippie shirt, you know, Grateful Dead shirt, and corduroy shorts and flip-flops, ratted out whatever hair I had, went down to the office. There's a big tubby Texan guy, you know, with the big glasses and, you know, And he interviews me. He's like, son, you don't want to be in the Army anymore, do you? No, sir. No, I don't. He's like, well, it says you smoked pot once. Did you? I'm like, well, yeah. You know, that's what my sergeants who got me in the Army, my recruiters told me to say. Like, well, maybe you did a little more. So he asked me to work up a story. Some of it, who knows, you know, yeah, I smoked pot a few more times than that, but like, wasn't like a dealer or anything. But anyway, he just helped me work up the story. And at the end, he's like, all right, since everyone was gone, he conducted the interview in the senior drill sergeant's office. There wasn't a secondary witness. And so at the end of it, he slid the paper over. He's like, can you sign that and date it? And then slide it back to me. And my dad had always told me, don't sign anything you don't have to. So I said, do I have to sign this? And he said, well, if you just sign it, then we can finish up and we can be done. I said, no, sir, that's not what I asked. I said, do I have to sign it? I didn't even know what it was, but I said, do I have to sign it? And he kind of got nervous and he said, well, you know, I mean, come on, if you sign this and we can be done. I said, do I have to sign it the third time? He said, well, no, you don't have to sign it. He said, well, then I don't want to sign it. So he starts laughing, this big man, right? He starts laughing and he's just like tears, right? And he's taking off his glasses. He's like, Private, slide that paper back over to me. And after he finished laughing, he's like, Private, if you sign that paper, I can guarantee you two things. You would have paid $10,000 in fine and you would have done at least a year in federal penitentiary for fraudulent enlistment. After he just helped me create this story and tried to get me to sign it. I said, he goes, but as it is now, this is all hearsay. So I'll just make a recommendation that, you know, you don't get your top secret and you will either have the choice of getting one of 154 non-classified jobs in the U.S. Army, or you can get out. I went upstairs and I had a dream. I was exhausted, emotionally spent, blown away. My head was buzzing and I just fell down. I hadn't slept much over the last few days, right? Coming up to that decision, try to get out, and lo and behold, I had this interview. And during that dream, there was a distinct spiritual guidance in it. A process of going places I lived in the past, you know, meeting people I knew, and then meeting somebody. And as we were walking, actually we were out in Grandpa Gene's and Grandma Joe's old farm out in Carver, and I was walking down the roadway there, the gravel road, and I was talking with this young woman that we had met, and she was a paralegal. I don't know why that was important then, but she was like explaining to me stuff, and I was like, huh. And it's like that person, you know, kind of had a bit of a glow about them, and they were explaining, it was like this and that about how reality works, and then it started to fade. And then I heard her say, this person, if you stay, I'll be there. If you stay, I'll be there. I wake up and I thought somebody had said something like Zachary. So like I look around the whole barracks, it's the middle of the day, there's nobody in there. I go in the TV room, there's nobody there. And it hit me. The whole thing flashed through my mind. Zachary, if you stay, I'll be there. Having just had this interview with the FBI director, or not director, this guy, and just having gone in that day to try and leave, get out of the Army. I should probably tell you that you're like, well, why'd you go in the Army, Zach? Well, I was 18 and I had done a lot to my life to that point. But I knew that I was kind of in a middling situation. And I remember telling myself, I said, if I'm not in school again, because I'd done a little community college and whatnot, and didn't know what to do with it. And I had worked and sold computers and made a lot of money doing that. And what's the point of that, right? So, partied a little bit. I didn't really see much future in that either. So I told myself, I said, if I am not in school in the fall, getting 4.0 or thereabout grades, then I'm going to enlist in the U.S. Army. So I might experience a little bit of hell to better understand the gift that I've been given with this life. And when I realized I wasn't going to be in school that summer in the fall, I went ahead and enlisted. And I'm glad I did, because I'd experienced a lot of hell being held over. Nearly having my life taken, being beat to hell in some bathroom between Oklahoma and Texas. And having cursed out God and discovered that there was a God that was there. And then wanting to give it all up and just give up and go home. And then my FBI interviewer showing up and then working up this crappy story, and me nearly having to pay a fine because he was corrupt. And I didn't know. I was just like, well, what do you mean? Let's just get out. Next thing I know, he's setting me up to go to do some time and have a felony. God saved me in those moments. Then he gives me that vision. And in that vision, that voice of truth, that person I was talking to said, if you stay, I'll be there. And I knew that that person in my dream was truth. She was wisdom. So when I woke up, it was so audible, I thought somebody was calling my name in the room. There's nobody there. So I stayed. And a number of weeks later, my clearance was denied on the hearsay evidence. And I had to reclassify or get out. And I was allowed to pick one of 6 MOSs out of 154. And one of the MOSs that I picked was legal specialist. Because in the dream, I met a paralegal people. Sure enough, I get to go be a legal specialist. And when I get there, I'm supposed to go into kind of a permanent party sort of barracks with other soldiers who've been around for a while. Because I'd been in for 9 months at this point. Or 8.5 months. Yeah, I was at a basic training boot camp unit for 8.5 months. It was really hard. It was really hard. So I went to my AIT unit. These are all people who finished basic training boot camp. And I go in and they decide they're going to scrap my orders. Somebody wrote into my orders. I was supposed to go to this permanent party because of my time in after 6 months. And they put me right back in with fresh people right out of training. And during that time while I was there, I ran into another bad unit. And they started to get that idea to start busting people out. The competition was just so great during those times. There was drawdown in military bases and military in general, and jobs were disappearing. And so the competition was insane. Less labor around too. And don't worry, all this got investigated later, not just my units. Like this was across the military, this thing. I actually met an investigator. He was a what was his rank? He was a major while I was in Fort Sill. He was investigating. Anyway, that all got resolved eventually. But while we were in, it wasn't. And I go to AIT, and next thing you know, I'm right back in it, studying to be a legal specialist, studying the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And I'm trucking along, and we've just got a couple weeks left. And then this senior drill sergeant of mine pulls me in the office. He says, "Private, I just want you to know you're not going to graduate. We're going to go ahead and be discharging you. But you don't quit. You keep doing your school." But yeah, this fraudulent, this testimony you gave, we're going to be discharging you. But you keep trying. So I graduate. No more stuff about it. And then all of a sudden, day of graduation, we're supposed to go get our orders. I finished in the top of my whole group with physical training and all that. And not the top of my class, but pretty close. And it was the word that we were getting, as you start to get word about where you might be going for your station, is me, myself, and another guy were supposed to go to a Green Beret unit, believe it or not, or at least that was the word, I'm not saying, But that was the word that we were supposed to go, Green Beret, and go on for all the school stuff that we were supposed to do, because we were physically able, our test scores were high, and we were judge advocate generals, legal specialists. And they need legal specialists out on the field with the lawyers, JAG Corps lawyers. So, but I go to go get my orders. He got his orders. Some other people I was with got their orders. And I was told, this is really weird. We don't have orders for you. So my captain and some people were trying to look good and trying to bust people out. And so they were grabbing soldiers in their training classes and working up stuff on them, holding them over, physical training, whatever. So here I was again, back in holdover. So you talk about Paul, like, I'm telling this whole story from a personal point of view. I have been somewhere where I was stuck for months and months and months with vindictive, and at times really nice, good guy, bad guy stuff. And the Lord just kept breaking me and breaking me and breaking me. And he kept speaking into my life, trying to bring his gospel. And I kept rejecting. I was like, no. There's more to this story. And I've already run longer than I normally run. But I just want to tell you, this whole thing that Paul was in, when you're stuck in a place, even if look, Paul's like, look, hey, try me. Go ahead, try me. I want to go to trial. I ain't going back there. We aren't doing round 2 back up in Jerusalem. I want to be tried. And hey, look, if I'm set free, I'm set free. If I die, I die. But I appeal to Caesar. I appeal to Caesar. I'll tell the next part of that story, if it's relevant, how God delivered me from the army and taught me that he was the God of heaven and earth, and that he was the God of Jesus Christ. That whatever he says, he'll do. So, day 153 tomorrow. Till next time, God bless you. Bye-bye.